So today we are going to discuss what are Java functions. So Java functions are basically the code blocks that are created for to be reused. So once you have created a code block and you want to again use it. So one way that we have seen was using loops, but loops it is my continuous execution. What if I want to execute my code block on go? Anytime, anytime, anywhere I want my code to be executed. I want a code block to be, called and to be executed. For that, we have a function. So almost like a code block is ready for you to use. And whenever there's a requirement for you to use it, just call that code block and it will be executed. So for that, first we need to understand how to create the functions and then how to call those functions. So in functions, in Java, we can say a function is a reusable block of code that perform a specific task. So when you're creating, when you're thinking about a task, that this task is something which I want to repeat, you convert that task, the statements related to that task into a function. So let's go into it. And also one of the major point that I would like to add in here is functions are also the best way to maintain your program. So if you want to do the execution and you want to manage your code in a much better way, you know that there is some problem in my program and that has been converted into a function. I can directly go to my function and can do the modification. I don't have to touch my entire program there. So that is also one of the advantage that we can say here for your functions. So to talk about the basic syntax of your function, these are the different parts of your functions. So let me first show you the actual syntax. So this is actual syntax of your function. So first you have, here is your access modifier. Now access modifier has been indicated within the square brackets. That means it is not a compulsory part to be declared. You can keep it optional. So in Java programming, we have 4 access modifiers: public, private, protected and default. So if we don't specify any one of like public, private or protected, default will be considered. So even if you don't specify, that's the reason it's kept as option. Even if you don't specify, it's fine. Return type, even if it is indicated here as an optional, but still you will have to give a default return type has to be 1. Why it is optional? Because it's not necessary for you to always return a value from a function. If you are returning a type of a function, specify that type. So here you can indicate the type that the function will be returning, whether it will be returning a number value, whether it will be returning a string value, or it's going to return an array or an object. Specify it here. The most important part here is your function name. Now the function name follows the same naming rules and the same naming conventions that we have seen it for the variables. That my function name, the first word should be completely lowercase. From the second word onwards, my first letter should be in capitals. That is basically my camel case that we are following here. And make sure that your function name, it should be a verb. Verb in the sense, the action. What exactly this function is going to do? My function is going to get the details. My function is going to calculate the result. My function is going to define the properties. So you need to make it in such a way that your function defines the task in a form of a verb, in a form of an action that it is going to perform. This is for your understandability when you are going to refer this program later. Then your function can also take some parameters. So there's a parameter list that has been indicated. What is parameter list? Parameter list is nothing but some group of values which you will be giving to your function, that these are some of the values you need to work on. Like you're saying, I want to repeat a code block, but for that code block to be repeated, maybe that code block also wants something from your end to be provided. Then only it will give you the result. So that input value which you will be providing to your code block here is nothing but your parameter list. Then within your curly brackets, you are going to actually write your function statements, the statement that needs to be executed when your function will get called. So to just summarize what is the different syntax of your function. So first we have is access modifier. So as I said, there are 3 major access modifiers. We have public, private and protected. Then we have your return type. So return type by default, even you don't want to return a value, keep it as void. But if you have a type, you can specify that type that you want to return. The function name is a unique name. It should not be repeated. Even if it is repeated, then there are few rules that we will be discussing about in your method overloading. But ideally, it should be a unique name for individual function. Parameter list is a comma separated input values which you will be passing to your function, but obviously when you are going to declare the function, you will be specifying what type of the value. We cannot pass this input value of any random type. We have to specify which type of the values are expected by this function. Lastly, you have your function body. So function body is nothing but the code within the curly brackets that will be executed when my function will get called. So I keep on repeating the statement saying that function needs to be declared, then the function needs to be called. So are there any functions which are already declared that we can use of? Yes. Your Java comes up with a very huge library of classes and the functions within those classes. Like few of the functions we have already explored, print function, your println function. Few we are going to explore in our string part. We are going to explore more of them in my datetime part. So there is a huge variety of different functions which are already predefined. So you don't need to declare those functions. You just need to call those functions. So there are predefined functions when I categorize my types of functions. So Java provides a wide range of predefined functions, also known as methods, that are part of your Java API itself. This includes the functions for your string manipulations, your mathematical operations, and more. But other than that, if I feel like I want to repeat a particular task, I want it to be repeated on Go, I can club the statements of all these tasks into one single function, and that will become my user-defined function. So user-defined function is developer can create their own custom functions to encapsulate. Encapsulate means I'm going to club it together, everything in one single place to define the logic and functionality within their Java program. So we are going to concentrate on this user-defined functions. What exactly are my user-defined functions? So this is just giving an example of a user-defined function. So user-defined functions are the functions that are created by programmers to create a specific task. The functions normally will have, as I shown you, access modifier. Here we are not specifying the access modifier. That means the access modifier will be assumed as to be default. You can indicate the return type, specify the value it's returning. If you notice, in the function body, we are returning a value. We are saying we are returning the value. So in the return type, we will specify what is the type of the value we are going to return. If it is a number value, then we can specify it to be int, float, double, boolean, your byte or your int. Specify your function name. Then in the brackets, in the round brackets, we need to specify the parameter type. So I am saying we will be passing an input. So that input will be of what type? What exactly will be the type of that input? And also you need to specify the name to that input. So let's say I'm calling a function add. I'm declaring a function add and I say add int a comma int b. So int a comma int b means there are two numbers that I'm supposed to pass, two integer numbers that I'm supposed to pass. First number will be identified by a variable named as a or parameter named as a, and the second number will be identified with a parameter named as b. So in my function, if these two numbers I want to identify with the user will be passing, let's say user will pass when it's calling the function at 10 comma 20. So value a will the variable a will be getting the value 10 and the variable b will be getting the value 20. So that is basically giving you an idea about what is this function used for. So passing the parameters to Java program. So you have the input parameters. Function can accept your input parameters, which are the values passed into the functions to be used in its operation. Every parameter which you are going to declare need to have a return type. So parameters can be of various data types such as integers, strings and custom objects also. When we are going to talk about the OOPS concept, even the objects or the classes can be defined as a type for my parameter. My function can have one parameter, zero parameters or multiple parameters declared. So I can have a function with no parameters. Fine. While calling, you're not supposed to pass any value. One parameter, you're supposed to pass one value. Two parameters, pass two values. So the number of parameters you're declaring at the time of the function declaration, that many values you will have to pass when you're calling that particular function. So again, just giving you one more example. So let's understand this with an example wherein let's say the user wants to find out whether a number is an even number and an odd number. So I have created one function to check whether the number is even or odd and I am saying give me one value. So user will pass me that value. In that function, I have written one condition wherein I'm modulus dividing this number by 2 and checking whether the division is 0 or not. Now based on the result of my condition, there will be two return statements. So if the condition is true, I will return number is even. Else me, I will say number is false. And both the statements I'm going to say return. But at a time, if you see, only one return statement will be executed based on the condition. So my function can have more than one return statements, but at a time, only one return statement will execute in reality. So here we are just going to summarize what we have understood about the functions. So first we need to define our functions. What are functions? Functions are nothing but the reusable block of codes that are created to work on a specific task. There are different types of functions that we can have. That is your predefined functions that are part of your Java API, user-defined functions. Recursive functions are also user-defined functions, the functions that call themselves. So they are also example of that only. Parameters are the input values which we can pass to my function. A function can have 0 parameters or n number of parameters. There is no limitation to that. But just take care of one thing: when you are declaring a function with that many number of parameters, while calling that function, pass that many values. Return type. My function will also return me a value. If it is not returning a value, that means the return type is void. Or if we are indicating a type, we need to then return. Make sure that it is returning that type of a value. Access modifier also plays a very important role, which we will be learning in depth when we are going to talk about OOPS concept, which will control the overall accessibility of who can access and cannot access a particular function. So I hope this session has been good. Thank you everyone. Okay, so let's see one example of how to actually work with functions. So just understand one scenario that as a student, I want to solve a problem, that I want to do a calculation of a rectangle's perimeter, rectangle's area, circle's perimeter, circle's area. And this is something which I want to execute again and again. So let's say my teacher is asking me, can you tell me what is the perimeter of a rectangle? My teacher will give me different values every time. She'll give me a length different, breadth different. Then after a few hours, she'll say, okay, now you try it out with this length and a breadth. So the input that I'm getting is always different. It's not like continuously different. Sometimes she'll ask me, can you tell me what is the perimeter of a circle? Then she'll ask me, tell me what is the area of a rectangle. So I need to create a task. I need to create a function which I can simply call, pass the values of my length of a rectangle, breadth of a rectangle, area of my radius of a circle, and get back the result. So for that, we have created here a small example. I've created here a class called as Math Solver. Within that class, I have used the syntax of what we have defined for function. So I have given the access modifier as public. Public basically means this function is accessible to all, just like my main function was. Static also will have the same meaning as that is there with the main function, which we will discuss by discussing about your static keyword. This function returns me a value of type double. That's the reason if you see in the function body, we have the return statement. And what this return statement is returning, it's adding up the value of a length and a width variable. What is this length and width? So if you notice, we have declared the function name and we have defined two parameters to that function. So one is my length parameter of type double, second is my width parameter of type double. So two values of type double, I will have to pass it as an input. Those two values then will be added up and the result will be shared back to me. Then we have created another function to calculate the rectangle's perimeter. So calculate rectangle perimeter. Again the same two parameters I am passing, my length and my width. But here the formula we have used is different. I am multiplying, I'm adding the value of length and width first and then I'm multiplying 2 through that value. So it's mostly, it's normally if you see 2 into length plus breadth, that is a formula we have here. For the area of the circle, we have created one function. So for the circle, we need only one input. That is the radius of a circle. And this is my library. This is my Java API, the math API, from which we are getting this constant value of a pi. So normally the value of pi will be 3.14. So that will be automatically given to me. I don't have to save it anywhere. This will be given to me for the execution. You can just see here when I'm moving my cursor over it, it's specifying what is the value for that pi here. Similarly, we are also calculating the circumference of a circle by passing the radius. Here the formula is 2 into pi into radius. Now these are my functions which are created. So we will be calling these functions. So to call these functions, what we have created is, I have created a menu driven program here. So in this menu driven program, first we have used a scanner object. We are taking the input from the user using this scanner object. I'm printing a list to the user that you want to do a calculation of a maybe perimeter or a your area, but of which shape, whether you want to do it for the rectangle shape or for the circle shape. So if the user says I want to do it for rectangle shape, so user will give me an input 1 or 2. So if user gives, so whatever the input is, that I will be saving it in my shape choice. So if the user gives me the shape choice as 1, the case 1 will be executed. If user gives me the shape choice as 2, my case 2 will be executed. For case 1, I am again asking the user to provide me with the length and the width, that is the width of the rectangle. Then I will call these two functions. So when I am calling these two functions, I am passing the values. So whatever the input I am going to get here in form of my length and my width, I am going to pass it as my values. So these two values, why I am passing only two values? Because that is what is asked. Two values are asked while the declaration is done. Then finally, I'll get back the value. So this function will take the length and width and will return the value. This is where the value will return back and will be getting saved in a variable called as rectangle area or rectangle perimeter. And finally, these are the two values which I am printing. Same execution, we are repeating it for your circle also. We are asking the user to provide the radius. Then using that same radius, we are calling your calculate circle area, calculate your circle circumference. The return function, the return value will be given to my variable circle area and to my circle circumference. And at the end of the day, we are printing both the values. In the default case, let's say user is passing me not 1, not 2, but some other value other than 1 and 2. So my default statement will be getting executed, which will print the option as invalid choice. So let's run this and see this program, this small program. So it's asking me for my choice whether I want to do the calculation for rectangle or circle. I will say I want to do it for rectangle. I'll pass my length as 10, width as let's say 14. So it is calculating, my function will get called. So this 10 and 14 from here will be passed to my function will do the execution. So I'm getting here my length and my width. So first we are getting the perimeter, then we are getting the area of the circle. Finally, the same thing we can do it for my circle also. This was for the rectangle, now we can do it for circle also. Let's say pass the radius of the circle as 5. So it is giving me the area of the circle and even the circumference of my circle. So that's it. Thank you everyone.